Welcome to Will's Personal Development Podcast. Today I'm going to be telling you about Will Smith's new book, I Am Will, and what I learned from it. Actually, I think the book's just called Will, but I learned a lot from this book. In fact, I think it's one of the best books in the last maybe 2 years. And that's saying a lot from me because I read a lot of books in this space. In fact, it took me so long to finish this because I was juggling various other books. I read a lot of books. For example, I finished 2 books by Tucker Max. I'm almost done How Google Works. I'm almost done A Hero with 1,000 Faces. And there's a few other things. I finished Willpower. And then there's a bunch of other ones. I was Jack Welch's MBA is another. So the point is, I read a lot of books, and I think this is the best book out of all of those in the last 2 years that I've read, or 2 years that have been published. And that's saying a lot. And I'm going to tell you why that is and what I learned and how you can apply it to your own life. First off, I read a lot of memoirs. I've read Lily Singh's memoir. I've read Kevin Hart's memoir. I read a lot of biographies, and this one I think is just a level above. I think part of it is because Mark Manson, a top personal development blogger, but also he wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which sold millions of copies. He co-authored. He was more of like from what I could tell, like a guest ghostwriter. But the book is just incredible. It's clearly still in Will's words, and it's not just well written, but it is just on another level in terms of vulnerability. Maybe that's because he went through more, but it really goes into the deepest caverns of his spirit, and he's honest with it. And, I think when you compare it to like Kevin Hart's book or Lily Singh's book, it doesn't really ever go there. It's more like, hey, this is my life. These are some mistakes I made. I think Kevin Hart definitely did that. He was honest and vulnerable about losing money, a lot of money by not paying his taxes. But Will's went much deeper into his inner psychology, his insecurities, and how that fed him to become successful financially, but also, just sometimes unsuccessful internally, not feeling happy or having his relationships fail, his family life fail. And a lot of that was fueled by certain beliefs or ideas in his head around how he wasn't adequate, and this seeking of approval, pleasing others, and how that manifested in his life. So I just felt it went really deep in that manner, and it was just that a little echelon better than everything else. Was it a perfect book? No, and we're going to cover some things that I think could have been better about it. I think the one thing I would have liked is what a lot of these other books do, is where the last chapter, like Arnold Schwarzenegger's, I think Arnold's biography is probably the one that gets close to Will's, but a lot of those other biographies, they have a chapter at the end just dedicated to their principles or tips or life lessons. In fact, if you want to do like a speed run, you could probably just skip to the last chapter. A lot of those biographies are listed, and they just kind of summarize their tips. Kevin Hart does this as well, but Will's does not end that way. It just ends kind of in a fun, triumphant way as he bungee jumps off a helicopter into the Grand Canyon. And it's really more of a story rather than like always giving you specific lessons. I think a lot of the others did that too, but they ended with that, and Will's didn't. And I think I would have liked to have that still, but I can see how it's more artistic not to, which is fine. There's plenty of biographies I read that aren't like that, in which case I have to draw the lessons myself through their stories. But in terms of the incredible things I learned, where do I start? There's so many. I think the first one would just be I was really surprised by his life. Some of these superstars, they're just like on point from the get-go, and then they're confident, successful, and everything lines up, and they just knock out achievements one after the other. Arnold Schwarzenegger's biography was kind of like that. I mean, he really didn't have any real like psychological issues. Of course, he had tough times. He came from poverty, but it wasn't necessarily like he had traumas or those type of things like Will did, or in the book Hillbilly Elegy, which talks about a uh, guy who had serious psychological trauma and terrible family life, who went on to become a successful Harvard law graduate. Um, and so it was somewhat refreshing to see that, because you always just assume, oh, this guy is just perfect from the get go, and that's how he succeeded. But he had some issues, and I think the biggest was his dad. His dad was very abusive to his mom, and it caused lots of different manifestations in his head that he had to work through his whole life. Uh, to the point where even when his dad, who he calls Daddy-O, was about to die, and he was wheeling his dad across the hallway, he had a thought come up about how one day when when he was a kid, he told himself one day when he was bigger and stronger, he would avenge his mom, and he had this slight temptation and just like throw his dad down the stairs and kill him. And so a lot of these things he had to work through. I think so. How he dealt with them, like the abuse towards his mom, the verbal abuse, and the alcoholism to his kids. He dealt with that by being a people pleaser, which is something I can relate to. And so he did everything he could to please and make his dad feel happy or laugh. And so he can always, often with his other siblings, he could immediately sense just by the jingle of the keys or the way his dad walked as he came home from work, what type of day it was for him. Was it a bad mood? Was it a good mood? And in his head, he thought like his job was to entertain his dad, and if he didn't and he failed and he beat his mom, that was his fault. It's a clear child reaction, although that's definitely not true. I mean, it's not your fault as a little kid to deal with that. And so I found his manifestation of that, as well as his dad, as two double-edged swords, because his dad had good parts and bad parts, and how that manifested in his coping mechanisms had good parts and bad parts as well. For example, his dad had some good parts to him too. He wasn't just this terrible person. He instilled in Will a lot of great things that fueled his success, particularly his militaristic work ethic. His dad was one of the smartest people he knew, and he had a military background. He did end up getting kicked out of the military, but he still took that with him. And so a lot of these lessons about how if you have a order, you get it done or you die. Or, if you do something, it's either 100% or it's nothing. 99% is the same as 0%. So that actually fueled his work ethic, which ultimately caused him to be such a success in Hollywood. At the same time, his coping mechanisms, which created these this tendency to people please and entertain everyone, that fueled his success as an actor, because that's what acting kind of is. It's about entertaining others, gauging the room, seeing and empathizing what these different characters are like. And so it was interesting and realistic and relatable for various reasons. I'm a people pleaser by tendency as well, but it's also interesting to see how different people cope. For example, his siblings coped in different ways. One would kind of argue back. There's fight, flight, or freeze response when you're in danger, and his brother would fight. His sister would do more of like I think a negotiation or remediator type role, and then he would cope by people pleasing. And so it's just interesting how that worked out. Now, what's different between me and Will Smith, and maybe you as well, is he had some crazy imagination. So much so that it caused him to lie a lot as a kid. His imagination was, I don't know if it was coping mechanism or what, but he invented these worlds that were so real that he believed them himself. And so when he was poor as a kid and he would go to a summer camp that was really barren with not much to do, he would run home and tell his mom how there was a carnival and there was a guy on the saxophone and they had a swimming pool, when none of that stuff actually happened. But in his mind, it wasn't like he was intentionally lying. He had actually tricked himself to believe all that, which was crazy. And so I think there's so many lessons in the book. I think another big one for me was just around success in general. Now, I've seen this various times, having studied successful people for almost a decade now and studied hundreds, but a lot of them will realize or come to realize that, hey, I'm rich, I'm famous, maybe even both, but I'm still not happy, or I'm still not fulfilled, or wow, I thought this would solve everything, but wow, I'm still feeling unsuccessful, or other areas of my life are crumbling down. And so it's just another reminder that you need to define what success is in a more healthy way and understand the pillars to success beyond just wealth. And so Will had a lot of success on the external side. We're talking movie awards, some of the biggest box office wins of all time. Independence Day was the highest grossing film of all time for a while. And he had like a 8-year streak in Hollywood where it was back to back to back number one movie hits. And of course, he was so successful that it blew all his expectations. He was richer than he thought he would be. He was more famous than he dreamed he would ever be. He had more awards than he ever thought he would have. He had a more incredible family, superstar family. But I think it crumbled for him with his relationships and his family. Him and his wife were on the brink of divorce, despite all this external success. And it took a lot of reflection. He even went to meditation retreats. He did a lot towards his later years to unwind and unravel the things that had caused all the issues, because he had a lot of psychological beliefs, habits, and stuff that were unhealthy and unproductive for fixing that area of his life. And the fights that he would get in with his wife affected the children too, because his children would experience that or hear it as well. So it was a mess. And I think what you should take away from that is essentially that you can't just keep getting more and richer and richer and richer and think that you can just throw money at something and solve the issue. Sometimes it's not just about getting more accolades and more, but Will had that tendency of just like, I'm just gonna do it bigger and bigger. And the same thing with like how he thought he could win his wife's love. What he wanted was not what his wife wanted, and he wasn't being empathetic to that situation and handled things often kind of in an immature way. And that's not knocking him, because most people, even myself, probably would have made the same mistake in his shoes when we're young and wealthy. For example, his wife, this is one of various representative situations in the book where his wife just wanted a small farm and she just wanted that small life. But Will was like, well, I want to become the greatest movie star in the world, and to do that we have to travel, we got to live in LA, and then I have to move about. So unfortunately, his wife had to sacrifice that for him, and he thought he could just make it up by buying this massive mansion for her with his money. Instead of it helping, it really just made it worse, because she fought with him tooth and nail for a long time. She did not want this mansion. She just saw it as more work. Now she had a whole housekeeping team that she had to manage to deal with this giant mansion and all the acres and the horses and stuff. And so it really wasn't being empathetic to her needs. Rather than, finding a way of giving her what she wants, he just, threw money at it. Later on, he really started to understand that more and understood how to better communicate those things rather than just saying like, well, I'm going to do this. You have to be more empathetic and thoughtful with your words, and say things in a more delicate way, but also give your partner some stuff sometimes. And so Jada just felt like she was sacrificing for Will. And then eventually they started patch things up. Will gave her something that she wanted, which was like one of the one things that I think she was able to do that she wanted, which is to just be a part of a, underground indie rock band. And that was just something that he let her do. And then he even attended some of her concerts in some of the small festivals that she performed in. And so that's one thing. I think another thing is, this is something you may have heard outside of the book because he says it a lot in interviews, but you can't make other people happy. You can make them smile for a moment or laugh for a little bit or feel a little joy or pleasure. But happiness or contentment is like this long-term enduring thing that they are responsible for themselves. And so he learned this the hard way because he felt that, he believed that, oh, I have to come with empty cups to my spouse and have her fill my cup and then make me happy. And then, just if I can't get that, then I'll be all bitter and upset. And that's not how it works. And so instead, he learned that he himself and his partner, they both have to go their separate ways and learn how to be happy themselves. And then present to each other the best version of themselves, a happy version. It is not up to someone else to make you happy. That is a recipe for disaster. And I wanted to emphasize this because it's something that's just, oh man, my t-shirt's itchy. It's just something that most people don't understand. And what I mean by that is a lot of people, they just think that, well, I can make people happy. Or, oh yeah, this purchase, this t-shirt, these shoes, this car, that's going to make me happy. Or that's going to make others happy. And it's a rather common but somewhat toxic understanding of happiness. I even saw it when I was reading the book Delivering Happiness by the founder of Zappos, where he kind of concludes one of his chapters by saying how, it just feels so good to make someone happy when they open a box of shoes we delivered. Now, I think he meant it in a innocent way, but unfortunately, that's not how it works. Material possessions, superficial things like that, those bring pleasure, short-term pleasure that come and go, whether that's in a few minutes, months, probably not even months, weeks, or even hours, it'll go away. And so contentment comes from other things, and that's a topic that I've covered in other videos, articles, and podcasts on the science of happiness and what brings happiness. So I won't go into detail here on that, but that was worth emphasizing. Now, it is worth mentioning that he was his life growing up was not like excessively screwed up or traumatic, but it did have those elements, mostly from his father, that caused those issues. And I think one of those was that whole idea I mentioned of, if you're not 99% effort is the same as 0% effort. And that's something that Will took to work to as a fact. And it helped him succeed in Hollywood. But then, in his later years, his therapist asked him, like, well, Will, like, can you break that down? Like, isn't 99% almost as far away as you get from 0% mathematically? And so when he really thought about it, something that he had ingrained in his head as a fact, it was the first time he was able to question it or even thought to question it. And he realized, just like, it broke his like belief systems, or his started making him question other things, like, well, what about 66%? What about 32%? If they're not the same as 0, then what does that mean? And so I think the point of that is to say that when it comes to belief systems, sometimes we just accept certain ones from childhood onwards because some adult told us. And sometimes those belief systems help us, sometimes they can hurt us. But sometimes it's worth checking all your belief systems and the sayings that go through your head, because just by unquestioningly accepting them all the time, you can let them hurt you without realizing. Okay, so what's another thing? Well, Will actually made a lot of mistakes with his money. He was successful like pretty early on when he was young. Now, he spent excessively when he was young because he had a #1 record hit. And, he got into like the music scene. He loved rapping. He would rap and put his work ethic in and like basically outwork his classmates. Every hour he spent of his free time was practicing rap, writing rap music. So that's how he got ahead. And so, he got into the scene with music and DJing, and that slowly built and built as he started to do like MC competitions and all this stuff. And this was all early days of all of that. So ultimately, it led to him being rich, but then just spending like crazy, excessively. We're talking like buying him and every one of his close friends like a diamond necklace and stuff. And I think that's another big issue with personal finance. Now, most of us don't have the fortune of getting rich young, but regardless, I think personal finance is unfortunately something that's still not taught well in schools. And so, unfortunately, what happened was he spent all of it, didn't realize he had to pay taxes, just like Kevin Hart, and he ended up owing like hundreds of thousands of dollars, non-inflation adjusted. And it was just another thing about just like, the ebbs and flows of uh, reaping fruit, because even Will Smith, this guy I thought was just like this constant workhorse, even he had his moments where, just the excess caused him to really slow down. So that was a period, I think it was a couple years where he was just like chilling because he had a lot of money, women, and so forth. And so it just kind of, he wasn't working as hard. And so, the taxes caught up with him and he ended up having to owe a lot and, try and pay off his debt. And so he had to work and hustle to pay that off. But even before that happened, with Will, it was just somewhat. It was somewhat interesting because first off, the the way music works then, like you may have a top one hit and so forth, but that's a very short term thing. And what I mean by that is that's a flash in the pan. So ultimately his fame died down as almost as quick as it came, and it was, he was partially kind of relaxing and chilling because there's a little bit of a dread for him to release his next album because he was scared that it wouldn't be as good. And then ultimately, this is one area where his dad helped him. His dad like got on him and his friends and said like, "What are you doing? Like you're just like hanging around, partying it up with girls. Like get back to work, get back in the gear, get that second album out." And so that kind of military drill dog attitude kicked him in, and he finally like released a second album, which unfortunately he didn't put as much effort in as his first still, because I think he had to hit a deadline or something, or he was still like, the time by the time he kicked in the gear, it was almost too late. But what was also interesting was there was a moment of kind of like lack of success. I don't think it really lasted that long compared to other people's lives, but it was still long enough. I think it was like a couple years where he put out his second album, it flopped, and like his money and all that stuff, it really started to like stop. And so yeah, I think it reminds me of Terry Crews's life, where there was a period where he was, after he retired as an NFL player, he just had this period of just like what do I do? Until I think his girlfriend or wife just like kicked him out of his butt and said, "You got to get out there. You got to meet people, talk to people. I don't care if it's like networking doesn't lead anywhere. You got to get out there." And so something similar like that happened with, I believe, a girl Will was dating, and it pulled him to Hollywood, and she pushed him to just keep showing up to the Arsenio Hall show. And at first he was just like, what, this isn't going to lead anywhere. It's just, I'm just going to show up and talk to Arsenio and his guests in backstage. Like, and Arsenio was the biggest talk show of the time, but he still didn't believe it would lead anywhere. But, sure enough, like through the power of effective networking, by being in the right circles and having the right talent and so forth, ultimately it led to him meeting a guy who wanted to do a TV show about his life, and that was how he got into the Fresh Prince. And so it's interesting how the world works in that way, where I think networking sometimes, if you're just going to a generic networking event, those kind of suck, but certain times when you network properly, when you give value rather than take, you show up properly, it can really pay off even if you don't believe it will. And I mean, he sprinkles lessons here and there throughout this time. He mentions how choosing your city is as important as choosing your life partner. That's something I've actually never heard before described in that way. I've gotten advice about how choosing your city is important, especially for dating, but for Will to say it's as important as your partner, I've never heard it to that extent. Why? Because Will realized how impactful your environment is to your life. For him, he said, I think LA was one of his big spots because the vibration there just fit who he was. He ate better, he felt better, he performed better. And so that may be different for you and me. I mean, I feel like I wouldn't like LA. I hear it's very superficial. But it's so true. Your environment affects your habits. He also says that the music business is fickle. The track you think will pop doesn't. The one you barely spend much time on goes crazy. That's the nature of the universe. But what matters is what you control in doing everything possible. It's funny because as Will reflected on his whole life towards the final chapters of the book, he mentioned how he often kind of bent his will towards what he wanted. Like most of his life was bending his will towards what he wanted out of it, and he would kind of make it happen through his sheer like work ethic. And so that's what he was doing here, like kind of in a way. But when you really look in it, like there's definitely like moments of like just like flow, like showing up, meeting the right person, almost you know letting the universe do its thing. And at the end of the book, he says, he learned that sometimes it's better to just slow down, stop thinking, and through that stillness, you can actually achieve twice as much. His grandma, who had a huge impact on his life, had a saying, had various sayings actually, and tons of positive impact on his life. But one of them was, hey Will, if you would just stop talking so much, you might be able to see some more of those hits before they arrive. And it was basically some advice about you need to slow down, have some stillness, and then you might be able to be even more successful as a rapper. And so it was very interesting. I think one illustration of this was him meeting Quincy Jones, one of the potentially greatest music producers of all time. And Quincy was actually who got him on to create this show, Fresh Prince. Quincy was kind of like creating the idea. And so Will describes Quincy as almost this mystical person who understands the universe's ways and how the universe is trying to help you succeed. And Will said that Quincy is one of those rare people that understand it and knows just the right things to say and do to get you out of your own way to let the magic of the universe happen. So I found that as something that stuck with me. For someone who's more scientific and empirical, it's interesting that stuck with me. But the whole world of law of abundance and success and stuff, I've been just looking at it more and more from a curious state of mind. In fact, I finally read Ask and It Is Given late last year, because that's like a big book that a lot of people who attribute their success to that field quote. Big Sean, Mike Posner are two. Anyhow, with Will, he was actually like shooting himself in the foot. He was like trying to like get this Fresh Prince of Bel-Air thing going, and Quincy's like, oh yeah, meet at my house. I'm having a huge party. We'll figure it. We'll have you do the audition there. And then Will's like shooting himself in the foot by saying like, I don't know about this. Like he wants me to audition while a big party's going on. And then he shows up at the party and there's all these superstars there. I think Quentin Tarantino's there and all these other people. And he just feels so small there. And so he goes into the room. They finally meet up. Quincy's there. He gets all the like Hollywood executives that would have the power to clear this show in that room. And Quincy's saying this stuff like, let's just do the audition now. Let's read it now and do it now. And don't let analysis paralysis stop it from happening. And so here's Quincy like trying to make it happen there. But Will's like, I need time to prepare. I need 2 weeks to read these lines, memorize them, get the right character and stuff. And he's fighting Quincy about it. And then Quincy says, y'all keep setting up. Let me talk to Will privately. And he says something like, we could do it in 2 weeks from now. But you know what's going to happen? That executive is going to call in and say he's going to reschedule for a month from now because his son has a soccer game. And then a month later, and then Will's thinking, okay, well, that's fine. We'll just do it a month after. And then Quincy goes on to say like, well, and then a month later, another one of those executives is going to say they have to reschedule because another important meeting got pushed up. And so you can keep having it postponed for a while, or you can just read it now and get it done now. And so Quincy was being this mystical magician with his words, and that triggered Will to just get it done there. He was just like, screw it. He read, it was incredible. There was a round of applause, and thus the hit show Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was born. Now, touching back on some of the lessons in the book, he also says self-destruction is a crime. Natural destruction is fine, but self-destruction is when you slack off and don't do everything in your power to achieve your goal. You will always have to live with what could have been. Natural destruction is doing everything you can and still failing. So he has this big belief and philosophy around there's a lot that's within your power, and within that realm, if you prevent yourself from achieving your potential or what you want out of life, that's your own fault, and that is a crime because you're forsaking what could have been. Another thing he said is pressure bursts pipes. Will has seen hundreds of people crumble through the pressure of possibilities. He's given jobs to hundreds of people, and in terms of what causes them to fail, it's actually just the pressure of the possibilities, the growth that's in front of them, and just that level of pressure and opportunities was too much for them. He didn't really go too deep into that. I would have liked to hear more about that, but I get the general idea there. That was interesting to me. So don't let that happen to you. Don't let the opportunities in front of you just like make you slip up. Now another one that he actually got from his, I think you would call him a manager, but his name's Harry Mack, I think. And this guy was like with him almost from the get-go, and was like, he started building like a little team, kind of like Kevin Hart did, from an early age, that kind of just helped him along, and they took a portion of commissions, but they were his friend. They were his friend as well, and they really helped support and promote him. And this guy, he would often say, scared money don't make money. And essentially what that means is if you let fear of losing money be the main thing that dictates you, you are forsaking those big opportunities where you could be making a lot more money, achieving a lot more success. When you come from it in a place of fear, you fail to take the risks, the decisions necessary for bigger payoff, and because you're so focused on those small things. So he brought that up a few times throughout his life story, and I found that very interesting. He definitely embraced that because he definitely didn't let fear dictate his life. In fact, his biggest fear was having a fear, which is why he heli bungee jumped over the Grand Canyon, because he was scared of it. So he attacked his fear. So, clearly a lot of these philosophies have had an impact on me. In fact, I haven't told anyone this, and I really don't talk much about Will Smith, but despite all that, despite the little information on Will Smith that talks about success before this book came out, it was so apparent to some in some ways that people would make little jokes or talk to me or say, hey, I saw Will Smith in the Miami airport, I thought you should know. And so why was that? Well, simply put, I put Will Smith as my laptop screensaver from a few years, many years, in a previous company I worked for, and my coworkers would notice and talk about it. And so I don't know if it was manifesting or what, but I would still like to meet him one day and pick his brain. I think it's still possible, but it's just very interesting. He has so many philosophies, and I think one thing this book did was it shattered a lot of them, but in a good way. I think it's better to have a realistic, holistic understanding of a person rather than just some a warped sense of it. because I think I still admire him a lot, but I think I was in the past before I read this book basing a lot of assumptions on what I could glean on YouTube. And so I pictured him as this more of like can't do no wrong superstar with a lot of work ethic and like endless work ethic and all these really solid philosophies about the power of reading books, about the power of storytelling, about the power of setting goals and attacking fear. And now, while some of that still remains, it's like, man, this guy he was just like everyone else. He had trauma as a kid, he had tons of insecurities. He was so scared of being cheated on again after being cheated on the first time as a rapper that he compensated by saying he wanted to be the greatest actor, and if he was that good, no one would ever cheat on him again. And so it's unfortunately a double-edged sword, and I don't think it has to be that way. I think you can achieve internal fulfillment and external fulfillment. Arnold Schwarzenegger, maybe one example, but for him it was tougher, and I'm glad he finally worked out some of that stuff because I don't think it's healthy to go at it from that angle. And I'm so lucky and fortunate to, in these last few years, um, reflect and learn about these things rather than learning the hard way, having to become, having to chase fame or fortune or both, only to then learn that that's not the way to compensate for your own insecurities or your own fears, um, because it's not necessary, and that's something I'm not just saying to you. I'm telling myself it's not necessary. You don't have to be this superstar actor, multi-millionaire to be loved and accepted and to love yourself. And it's tough for me, for him, for others to sometimes realize that. Um, so what else did I learn? Will's grandma, Gigi, amazing person, super kind, very religious, even would take homeless people off the street, feed them, clothe them, and let them use her bath. And Will would be shocked and disgusted by it, but it really taught him about being kind to people on the way up. Gigi told him, be kind to the people on the way up because you will meet them on your way down. So beyond that, I think it's just more about the spirituality of giving back. He has a chapter towards the end of the book about death because his dad was dying, people were leaving his life, and you start to be reminded about your mortality. And Gigi taught him a lot because Gigi was just always of service and helping others and giving. And Will realize that when you leave a legacy, what's gonna matter, what's gonna remain after you die is not all the selfish things about what you accomplished, what you did, what you built. It's about what you gave, how you helped others, the service you gave to others. And something more profound is that he said that love has different laws of physics. You need to give love to get love. You can't ask for love to get love. And it is by giving that you serve and leave a mark after you die, not your accolades. And it's interesting because one of my top role models is Warren Buffett because of his life lessons, not his financial lessons. Yes, he was the richest person in the world for many years, but he had so many life lessons that it were imparted to me as him as a mentor and teacher from afar, virtually through the YouTube videos where he talks. And one of them is the more love you give, the more love you get. It's the one commodity in life where the more you give, the more you get. And so that was profound. And I think John Paul DeJoria, another billionaire, said something similar. So it gets pretty deep. You can see why this book is more spiritual and helpful in a way than some of the others, and why I have such high ratings for it. There was a lot of surprises too. Um, I found out that there was up and downs in his life, uh, and if he didn't leave the East Coast for LA, um, that may have not kicked off his life. So there was that lull after his music career started to die, like literally die, and he couldn't get it back. And I think there's definitely sometimes just luck sometimes pushes you in the right way. And so I think what tipped the scale for him to move to LA was his friends were being monitored by the FBI. And he still had a lot of debt from taxes to pay off. So he was like, I got to get out of Philadelphia. So that was something. And then, once again, it was his girlfriend, Tanya, that pushed him. Now, one thing I found interesting about Will was just, I mean, each successful person I studied has different like little traits that just surprised me a bit. Will never was the type who wanted to sleep around with a bunch of women, have a lot of one night stands. He always wanted he had this he always wanted this picture of a perfect family. A wife that would never leave him and cheat on him, perfect kids, that like house and everything. And if I had to guess, once again, it probably comes from the trauma of his childhood and seeing the family he was brought up in with little money and all the other issues related to living like that. However, uh, I think it's just interesting to see that because I think the stereotype is this type of superstar is the type that wants to just sleep around and probably could, but I think it was just you really saw Will kind of figuratively naked, and it's tough to expose yourself to a world like that, but I'm sure it'll help a lot of people because you see that little kid that continues to be there with him and the trauma and the things he's working through and how it's kind of forced him to kind of pushed him to be. And so a lot of his struggles and the things stories he tell are around building that dream of that perfect family. And he got a divorce with his first wife, and he thought it'd be just like perfect. He married quickly, and it was just a mess because they had a kid together, and it it was a lot of that. So it was surprising to me to see that, but also it made a lot of sense that he wasn't a guy who wanted to sleep around. And then when I equated to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bruce Lee, I think they had like different things as well. I think Arnold was just so focused on his goals of being an actor, being Mr. Olympia, that uh, that was the general flow of his life. And then other things like women were just they weren't as much of a focus for him. So he would have flings on occasion, but it was usually almost as if generally a byproduct of his life and his work. He met his wife, Maria Shriver Kennedy, through his work promoting fitness for the USA and the government. He met one of his flings through promoting a movie, over, filming a movie overseas. And then with Bruce Lee, I think the one thing that's similar is that with Bruce, I mean, I just assumed he was just this confident, amazing guy. But he actually had a lot of hidden insecurities. He actually got circumcised like towards his later years in life because he wanted to be more American. And he did a bunch of other things. I think another crazy thing he did was he had his sweat glands for his armpits removed because he didn't like the sweat stains it showed. So there was a lot of kind of hidden insecurity underneath that confidence. And it was actually helpful to me because as someone who is not always confident, and sometimes, very, very clear with that, and honest with that. Sometimes I end up thinking or believing that, oh, I need to be this confident person, or super confident people were always like that. And you're seeing, wow, behind the surface, these people who are actually pretty amazing and successful, they have their own internal issues. You just never know what's going on. Okay, so what else? Acting was really his X factor. He liked music, but he loved acting. So it just really fit with his talents and passions. And I think that's something that really is important to you. Uh, you need to find out, taste and test different things, and figure out what skill set really unleashes your X factor. Um, Now, he also says there are different like methods of behavior and thinking that help you in the past that you must toss away before because they no longer serve you, and many people fail to adapt. Um, and so I think that if there was one thesis to the book, it was that one, because yeah, a lot of things served him well until like midlife, and they no longer served. They were very, very helpful for getting his way in and making money, but then failed him in his relationship life. But it wasn't always just that. It was even like he grew up in a kind of violent, almost confrontational uh, environment. And in those environments, you react in a certain way to things. And so I remember one part in the book where he brought that Philadelphia attitude to a boardroom business meeting. And through his rose colored glasses, he thought this boardroom executive guy was like coming at him and about to swing at him based on his previous experience in Philly. And it ultimately caused a crazy confrontation where he was just like raging at this guy. But then like later on when he cooled down and he like reflected, I think with Quincy, it just made no sense because the boardroom executive was this like old 60-plus-year-old guy who was generally pretty calm. And so although they were disputing some artistic thing about the script, um, he realized that like some behaviors that protected him from predators don't work anymore. So you really have to figure that out. One thing of, and we're getting into the review portion of the book. Um, One thing I found interesting was that unlike Arnold Schwarzenegger, there was definitely certain moments where he didn't have a clear goal and vision and organized plan. He kind of went with the flow, at least with his music and so forth. But I think there was a general direction, especially once he started acting. I mean, he wanted to become the biggest actor in movies, um, and he set that as a goalpost. But I think this was more unlike Arnold, who kind of decided each milestone for himself. I think there's people that kind of pushed him along to define those goals, or just kind of pushed him in the right direction. Quincy Jones being one, but also I think there's another one of his managers who just like one day said like, hey, like, just filling these acting roles is not fulfilling. What do you want to accomplish? And that spurred him to just reveal something that he had never said out loud, but was just a thought, and that was to become the biggest actor in movies. So I found that interesting. I think the music part of his career, there was some direction, but I think it was just a mixture of his work ethic, his passion for it. He just enjoyed it. It was just something he did for fun. That was like a way of life. Like everyone rapped, everyone like loved hip hop music. So it wasn't as much. It was more kind of flowy than Arnold Schwarzenegger's life, at least in the beginning. Um, yeah, I think Another thing was just his addiction to approval was very clear, and he wanted to be that people pleaser, but ultimately that led to him fulfilling that approval by becoming a workaholic, which his dad had taught him. And he had been taught through his life trauma that if he was not working, he was being lazy, or something bad would happen, or someone would cheat on him because of his dad and his life. And so while that served him for a while, he couldn't turn off. And may not be a surprise to you. I think there's plenty of successful people who have fell into that before, but he had, towards like his later years in life, he had to like realize, like, man, what's going on here? I think he went on his first vacation to like Jamaica or something, like his first vacation period, then to Jamaica. And he everyone else was just chilling, relaxing, and he was feeling antsy. And he was like, why is this? And he realized he was a workaholic then, because he just felt there was something wrong for not working. So while I respect his work ethic, I think it definitely caused many issues, relationship wise. But he got through it. I think in general, I mean, his life has just been amazing. He was able to recharge, reflect, go to meditation retreats, have a therapist, and read tons and tons of books. And all of those things ultimately, got him to a better place with himself, and learning to love himself and be okay with not working all the time. I also respected the fact that he never did any sex, drugs, alcohol. He said in the book that he never did any of those, and so the only thing he was addicted to was work. So there's still stuff he needed to work on, but it was nice to know that you can make it in Hollywood without going through that route, because it just seems like riddled with all that stuff. But he was able to do all that and become the first Grammy award-winning rapper ever without any curse words. Now, for me, the curse word thing, that's pretty deep. I'm not going to go into my full story with that, but long story short, I was one of like two kids out of like 200 people in middle school in my class who did not curse. I remember walking around one day and mentally noting that every single person, even like the nicest girl, nicest person, I've heard them curse once or twice. And it was the cool thing to do, and I got picked on and pressured to curse. But I just came from a religious background, and I just felt it wasn't necessary. But I dealt with some tough times because of that. Will, he came from a more of the angle of, well, it's cool to curse, I'm cursing. Gigi's telling me not to curse, so I'm not going to. And so he came from a different angle, but I found that interesting, that someone out there still thinks not cursing is cool. Therapy helped him reflect on a lot of the axioms on his life that didn't serve him any longer. I mean, that was just very useful to him. And I think he does have this final thing in the book about ayahuasca, but I really respected that he prefaced it by saying he was severely thinking about not including this in the book, but it is his reality, so he felt like it would be more holistic to put it in there. And he highly recommends consulting a medical professional and doing your research before trying it. And I say all that because I can't tell you how many people I've seen, influencers, successful people, celebrities, even people I've met at like a sailing league, like a boat sailing league. I did that one year, and they all like have done ayahuasca or recommend it. And I'm just so sick of every year, every like few months, some new trend coming out and everyone recommending it to me, especially since I do like men's personal development stuff. Like that's where it spurs from oftentimes. Um, so the thing is, they're always kind of like fixated on this next new thing that will solve all their problems. And, I just don't think right now I want to do that or shelve out a monstrous amount of money to drink some hallucinogenic concoction in the Amazon. Um, and so I just want to be one of those minority few voices that say, hey, it's okay to not jump on this trend and do ayahuasca. But it actually did end up helping him. He hallucinated, so he drank it, and for the first hour, nothing changed. So he just thought he was immune to it, and he was like, "Wow, that was a waste." He went to sleep. That's when he started to hallucinate. He found himself in a mystical universe with stars painted like Vincent van Gogh, and it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He was light years away from family. He knew he would never return to them. Then the spirit comes to him and says, hey, silly, this is not the universe, this is yourself. And then he started to cry and purge his insecurities because he thought that if he could be so beautiful already, he didn't need hit records, number one, movies, box office accolades, awards, to be loved or accepted or be seen as worthy or awesome. And that hit me as well. It's so incredible that self-love and that type of stuff doesn't affect just average people, but even these superstars, they're struggling and working with it. It reminds me a bit of the Netflix Taylor Swift documentary, which was very interesting. I had never seen that side of Taylor because she's just so, at least the documentary, the director made it seem like she was so fixated throughout her life on pleasing others as well. She did things for the applause and the approval of family, friends, the crowd. And, that caused some issues in her life, which the documentary actually does not show that she's resolved. So, hopefully she finds something herself, maybe through reading Will's book or her own way. But, yeah, I think that was one of the deepest things for me in the book because for someone like me or you or us who are not making millions of dollars, who have a normal salary, who have a normal life, who have a normal level of accolades, if any, who have normal levels of things to offer, and maybe just not seeing the results they want out of life yet, or even, slightly better results, because they have just reasonable goals. It can be very tough for them sometimes for us to have that self-love and say, I am worthy, that I am good, that I'm fine, that I'm okay here. And how do we do that? There's many methods. I don't have all the answers. Some people say, you stare at yourself in the mirror and you repeat, I love you, I am worthy. But you got to find your own way. And this is getting long, so I'm gonna cut it off here. Thank you for listening to this whole thing. I think I'm gonna give this book a plus, 5 stars. Is it perfect? No, but I think it's not maybe Bible level or S class, but it's right there under it. Incredible book, probably worth rereading. Honestly, it's that good. I'm so glad that someone who has this platform is doing it right, and props to Mark Manson for likely helping this along, because writing a book is a multifaceted skill set. You need to make it short enough, not too excessively long. You have to have the right things. It has to be in Will's voice. So incredible, well done. So many people are reading this book already. I saw ads all over for it when I was in the New York metros, and For me, I have big dreams. I have reasonable dreams, but these things I'll keep in my mind. And um, I had already started to reflect and realize them. And this helps cement some of those things that I had in my head that I should think about and regulate. Because I think if you had caught me 10 years ago, before I started reflecting on books like these and lessons, I would have been the one who may have had that tendency like Will. For sure, in fact, perhaps, I would have been the guy who was like, I'm going to be this superstar actor, and only then will I be cool enough and amazing enough to, get the women I want and all this stuff. But those types of things are not a healthy mindset or motivation for getting those things. And that is the thesis of the book, if I had to choose one. It's that whole thing about having beliefs and mind systems that were ingrained in you, sometimes unconsciously, that may have served you at one point, still serve you, but may now be hurting you. It is time to detect them and get rid of them. And there's a lot of those in this book, not just the one I just mentioned. So figure out those beliefs, work on them, fix them, and work towards your dreams, what you need to be happy, because chances are it's probably not making, a lot of money when you already have a lot of money. It's probably not having to become the number one best in the world in order to get something that will compensate you and supposedly fulfill that hole and make you happy. Those types of holes may never be filled and just leads to a toxic cycle. So find that out yourself. For me, how does one figure out that they are enough as they are now, that we were always enough, that we don't need to stretch for all these things? I don't know. That's a $1,000,000 question. If you have tips, if you have ideas, if you have things that work for you, please let me know. Reach out, leave a comment to help others, and DM me, contact me, because I'd love to try it out myself, but also help others by spreading that info. Thanks for watching. See you later.